mic would be good. It's quite high up, polo neck. Hello, thank you for joining me on this very special day. Oh, I don't like that being there. Thank you for joining me to celebrate the paperback cover revelation for the Magnificent Sons. If you haven't seen it already, this is it. I don't have a real copy, obviously, and I don't even have it printed out because my printer is only black and white at the moment, going through a monotone phase. So I have it on my iPad, very glamorous. It's not quite as lurid orange as that in real life, but there you go, that's it. So to mark the occasion, I'm going to do a reading from the Magnificent Sons. Just a few details about the new cover. As you can see, the illustration is kind of based on the hardback cover for the Magnificent Sons, except the two brothers have no legs. In this edition, no room for legs or feet on paperbacks, I'm afraid. And the colours have changed. Very, very striking orange and delightful purple jersey from the brother on the left there, with a lovely, what would you call that, teal maybe, on the right. Anyway, there they are, the two brothers being magnificent, etc. So I'm going to do a reading from the Magnificent Sons. If you don't know anything about the book, then fair enough, it's been a busy year. It is about two brothers, one of whom is 17 years old and just comes out as gay at the beginning of the book, and his older brother Jake, who is 29 years old, who is bisexual, but secretly, because, you know, he hasn't told anybody. And when his younger brother comes out, Jake starts to question his own sexuality, maybe decide it's time to embrace it and tell everyone. Well, the one snag is that he has a girlfriend, a long-term girlfriend called Amelia, who is pretty serious. They've been together 2 or 3 years. I can't remember. I should be able to remember that. I wrote this book. Pretty serious, and they're getting to that stage where, you know, all their friends are getting married. Maybe it's time to think about moving in, that kind of thing. So the part I'm going to read is from quite early in the book, beginning of chapter 4, if anyone is reading along. Do people do that? I remember at school, used to read along when the teacher was at the front with their book, but I don't know. Quite early in the book. Jake has not told anybody yet that he is bisexual, but he is certainly feeling that way. And he and Amelia are kind of vaguely circling the idea that they should maybe have moved in together by now. So I suppose I should get going. So just to set the scene, Jake and Amelia are on a morning out in a bakery. Okay. They were having a Saturday morning out together in a bakery, munching through a basket of breads, croissants and jams. As Jake watched Amelia butter her walnut loaf, his gaze tracked to the table behind, where a blonde, moneyed family were working their way through the messiest things on the menu. Sitting slightly apart from them, but definitely one of them, as his hair was just like snow, was a cool little boy, around 7 years old, playing with several dolls and wearing a pair of shades that his brother would no doubt have called Fabdragulous. They were bright pink, with shooting stars around the lenses. His favourite doll was an immaculately groomed one he kept referring to as Caress as he fed her a muffin. Jake managed to filter out the clacking of crockery and dreary middle-class small talk, such as, "I want to be kitchening in the basement and laying the synthetic lawn by September," and managed to hear the boy's chirpy narration. He was so bright and cute, but was obviously hard work. He was in the middle of demanding a decaf latte for his doll. The rest of the family treated this like standard behaviour. The little boy looked into a compact as his smaller sister watched, rapt. "Can I try on your glasses, Hector?" she said. The boy sighed dramatically and handed over his prized shades, mechanically turning the compact round to her as she clumsily put the glasses on with her precious chubby fingers. "I like them," she warbled. The compact swung back to face its owner. "I don't think so, Maisie," he deadpanned, whipping the shades off her head. "Not very you." Jake stifled a laugh. What a legend. Amelia looked up from her phone. "What's funny?" "Oh, nothing. Just that little boy at the table behind." Amelia turned to look, knocking her coffee cup over in the process. The clatter of porcelain on wood and the ensuing commotion startled the boy, who looked up and caught Jake staring. The boy slowly put his doll to one side, took off his glasses, and reached into his satchel, baby blue with unicorns on, and he pulled out a crayon and pad. He drew with exaggerated concentration, occasionally peeking to see whether Jake was still looking. Jake was jolted back to those moments at school when he worried about being found out, as if the self-editing had failed and you showed yourself to be someone else all along. "I was partial to playing with a doll in my time," Jake said finally. "Were you?" said Amelia. "That's quite cool." "Well, they weren't my dolls. My mum's friend's daughter had hundreds. She let me play with them round hers." Jake thought back to Gina's legion of flaxen-haired, orange-skinned dolls, painted with bemused smiles, and remembered one afternoon Renee and Gina at the door when his dad had come to collect him, Gina holding out one of her C-list dolls to him. "Borrow her if you like," she'd said. Did he really remember his heart quickening? He definitely recalled his little hand hesitating, then his dad's throaty chuckle and a refusal on his behalf. "Oh, we've got more than enough toys at home. We'll never fit this little lady in there. We'll bring some of Jake's toys over next time, eh?" That first flush of confusion burned as his dad had scooped him up in his arms, Jake staring over his shoulder as Renee and Gina waved, getting smaller until the doll was just a dot. Now, Jake cleared his throat and thanked the waiter for mopping up the spilled coffee before glancing up to see Amelia smiling, looking at him anew. He didn't often share secrets. "What kind of dolls did you play with then?" she said. "Crying baby kind or pneumatic knockers Barbie?" Barbie," he said. "Maybe it was the Hooters that appealed." He laughed awkwardly, aware of sounding ridiculous. Amelia wrinkled her nose. "Hooters? Yuck! You don't seem like the kind of boy to play with dolls." He smiled. "Maybe I was just anxious to get my hands on a naked woman." Amelia winced. Why was he like this? "Anyway, I soon grew out of it." "Well, not entirely," she said. "You've always been keen to get your hands on my, Hooters." Amelia chuckled. "Do you know, sometimes I wish I could go back to playing with my dolls all day. They used to have amazing, sexy dates with my brother's action man. And of course, all Freddie was interested in was brushing my doll's hair. All the signs were there." Jake bristled at the mention of Amelia's gay brother, but she didn't notice. "Wouldn't you like to do that?" she said. "Go back to when things were simpler, to Gina's dolls, to your Lego or whatever." Jake smiled. "Absolutely. Well, the Lego, for sure. But nothing had been simpler then. Nothing at all." Amelia hated not being able to work things out. She was a problem solver. As a teenager, she'd routinely ruined boyfriends' lives by contemplating unfathomable video games without breaking a sweat, and she was a dream when it came to working out complicated logistics, probably why she'd been called on to organise so many sodding hen nights. But Jake continued to be a puzzle, even after all these years. At first, she'd found it intriguing. Men were usually all over her, splashing the cash, which she actually found suffocating and demeaning. But when she'd first met Jake, at yet another wedding of two people far too young to be plighting their troth to anything except a Netflix subscription, she'd felt drawn to him. He was wry and charming, no hint of sleaze. Everything he'd said was carefully considered, with grace and purpose. He was funny, but didn't laugh at his own jokes. Instead, his eyes would glint and he would look off into middle distance to let the punchline land. His description of the bride's bouquet, looking like it had been picked out of the blades of a threshing machine, had her screaming. To be fair, it had been a very unfortunate attempt to use wildflowers and different grasses. And as he'd pulled apart the menu, table settings and bizarre token system for paying for drinks with acidic precision, she'd wanted him to be her best friend forever. He'd been attentive too, flagging down canapes or signalling to barmen for another bottle, once he'd checked she wanted to share one, of course. He'd asked before pouring her wine. Most men would have just sloshed it in, trying to get her drunk. When he'd poured, it was deliberate, careful, the same amount for each of them. She'd known she wasn't dealing with the usual predator here. This was the kind of man she'd read about in dog-eared copies of Tatler in the dentist's, or heard her aunties mourn after another encounter with millennial rudeness in the co-op. This was a gentleman. Her neck had flushed in the realisation. She smiled warmly as she signalled yes, she'd want a top-up. He'd looked into her eyes as he poured, grateful maybe, to finally be recognised for who he was. She couldn't tell, though, whether he'd fancied her or not, and it infuriated and delighted her. So, when, at the end of the evening, she'd eventually grabbed his expensive yet understated tie, pulling it and Jake toward her, it had felt like the sweetest of victories. He still excited her now in a way, and she'd feel a strange surge of affection for him whenever she spotted him getting a bit out of his depth. He wasn't great in large groups of strangers, and he seemed to have a personality transplant whenever he crossed the threshold of his family home. Lately, though, he'd been prone to drifting off, like he was trying to remember the last item on a shopping list while she was talking to him. It was starting to grate. She didn't see why she was kind of secondary in his thoughts. Why couldn't he just talk to her? Sometimes she missed her last ex before Jake. A fucking biblical liar. But at least she'd held his attention. But no, Jake was different in a good way, the best of ways. Still, she wasn't sure how much more of this difference, or indifference, she could take without screaming. She remembered the uncharitable thought she'd had as Jake had grazed his card over the reader in the bakery that day. He was sweet and gentle and proper, but when it came to mind-melting confusion, he was worse than every heart-crushing fuckboy she'd ever met. Sorry about the swears. So that's from The Magnificent Sons, which is out now. That's the hardback edition, which is in the shops currently. And I'm just going to show you the paperback cover again for those who've just joined and haven't sodded off. I don't blame you. There's the paperback cover. So I have some questions. I've had some questions sent to me, so I will answer those. Please ask any if you have them now, or let's not say the number, however many there are of you. Okay, so someone has asked me if my novels are set in the same world. So The Last Romeo was my first one, and The Magnificent Sons is my second. They are, but not. They're not a continuation. So no characters from the first one appear in the second, I think. But there is a mention of, if you've not read The Last Romeo, it's about a dating blogger. And there is mention in The Magnificent Sons somewhere where Jake, the lead character, talks about something that, or another character actually, talks about something that they have read this dating blogger say. So yes, they are in the same world, and the third one, I got a new book deal, by the way, if no one knew that. So there's 2 more books to come, and in the third book, yes, it's the same world. There is mention of something from a previous book, so that's a spoiler for you. A spoiler, as if it's like Game of Thrones or something. I'm sure you do care. There was another question here. You wrote about age gap related relationships in GQ. Oh, sorry, it's gone off. You wrote a good piece on relationships with age gaps for GQ. Any chance of part 2? In GQ, I wrote a thing a while ago about age people, people going out with older people or younger people, and how judgmental other people can get, and that it was usually about something else. The problems with age gap relationships is usually some prejudices in there somewhere. No, I don't think so. I don't think there's going to be a part 2. It was quite a long piece. I've probably said all I need to about that. Never say never. though, of course. And one more question. Is The Magnificent Sons a sequel to your first novel, and would you ever write a sequel? No, it isn't. Again, going back to what we said before. And would I ever write a sequel to The Last Romeo? Maybe. Maybe. As for Magnificent Sons, no, I don't think so. I think that is better self-contained. I don't really want to imagine what happened next. I quite like the idea of it, just of us just being with the characters in that moment of time and then letting them get on with it, really. So no, I don't think so. So thank you very much to everyone who joined. Everyone just joining now, lol, sorry it's too late. So the hardback of Magnificent Sons is out now. The paperback of Last Romeo is out now. My Christmas tree is up now and staying up until March. The paperback, which I showed you earlier, will be out in April. And my third book, The Fake Up, which I've just signed the deal for, will be out in 2022. I will be doing another reading from The Magnificent Sons right here on Instagram Live in front of said tree on New Year's Eve because there is a chapter in the book which takes place on New Year's Eve in Edinburgh, and it's a very special chapter, and it is one of the few sections of the book that is based on my real life. So I do have a blog post that's been on the Guyliner for a long time, but it's been very popular, and so this time I'm going to read the version of it that belongs to Jake, that belongs in The Magnificent Sons. So I do hope that you will join me for that on New Year's Eve. I've no idea what time. I'll let you know. I'll put it on socials. But in the meantime, thank you very much for joining me and my incredibly itchy, uncomfortable jumper. Thank you.